Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Well, I'm starting to do videos again. So, last one we did on camp stoves, so this one I'm going to do chainsaws. A while back we did a video on 4 really good choices for vintage chainsaws for doing the type of work we do. You know, brushing, trimming, dropping trees, cutting them up, firewood and everything else. So this video we're going to have 3 of the really bad choices. So saws like these, you know, you can't take them in and get them repaired anywhere. So you're going to have to be somewhat mechanically savvy if you're going to own one of these and try to use one. So we'll start out with our Craftsman here. This is made by Poland, and they produced lots of these, and they sold them under private label names. And there's all kinds of little weird changes on them too. They made this basic power head in 32cc, 34cc, and this one 38cc. And why is that? Corporate stupidity. There's no reason. Should just have one basic saw. So this one is a little more unusual than most. Like I say, it's the largest displacement. It has what's called power sharp, and it was by Oregon. It makes Oregon chain and stuff like that. Bars, Oregon bars. This is an Oregon bar. It's a banana bar. It looks like a banana. And it's interesting that this came out a long time ago and it was a complete failure. And so what do? It's back on the market again many years later. Takes a special chain, and this bar is kind of a weird piece of crap too, because the way it's tapered and stuff, you can't flip it upside down. So if you have a lot of wear on the bottom of the bar and you flip it over, then the chain will get really hot and stretch. So anyway, this little power sharp system, there's a stone in there. It's curved stone, and there was a lever here originally. This is missing some parts, and you would move that lever in a certain position and run the saw up and push that, and it'd sharpen the chain. So that's for people that have no sharpening skills and shouldn't even own a chainsaw, especially one of these. But the thing that's interesting on these is that the smaller one and the mid-sized one and this one are all slightly different. Now on this one, you know, it's a low hour saw, and the fuel system is different on it. Some have a metal tank, some have a plastic tank like this one. And the way the fuel line is routed is different on them too. So the early one, the fuel line comes out of the tank and goes up through the handle to the carburetor, which is a pretty good idea. On this one, they really made a stupid move, and they ran it down from the tank over to the engine case, and then there's a hole drilled through the engine case. So the line came up, made a 90 degree, went through the case, made another 90 degree, and then went up to the carburetor. And so what that does makes it really hard to replace the fuel line, which was a special line, and it's an odd size and you can't buy it anymore. And it sits right on top of the engine, so it gets vapor lock real easily from engine heat and warm weather. So this one, I put a line on it, and of course it kept pinching off because it had sharp angles. And so what I did to fix it, where the hole goes through the case, instead of making 290s, I just drilled a 45 degree angle right through it and slid it through and went to the carburetor and solved the problem. So why don't I recommend saws like this? Well, lots of reasons, and I'll talk about a few good features on them. One, they're light, easy to handle. It's nice to have a top handle saw. And the other thing that's interesting is these little saws are generally quite powerful. But so those are the 2 things: good ergonomics, relatively lightweight, and powerful when they run. So that's the goods. So the bads: inconsistent running, hard starting for no reason, just out of the blue. You might pick it up, start up right, great, run half hour, sit it down, come back a half hour later, an hour later, don't want to start. You get to screw around adjusting the carburetor and whatnot. And so the other thing is, of course, the power sharp, which is a bad idea and very hard to work on. So anyway, This is the third worst saw out of the three I'm going to talk about, so be back with the next. Okay, well, the second worst out of the three is our pulling wood shark, or what it really is the wood carp. It's a sucker saw for suckers. Think they need a chainsaw and don't know anything about them and buy a hunk of crap like this, and then they get really mad because it won't run most of the time and nobody will work on it. So don't buy one. This one was a gift. So anyway, this is a lot more modern saw. This was made in 2011. The Craftsman was made in the mid-70s, late 70s. This one pretty much laid out like a modern saw. You got your choke and engine control, on-off switch. And there's a chain brake and side fills. So the thing that I'll talk about, the few good features of it. There again, a nice size, good ergonomics, and that's basically all the good. The bad is that they're inconsistent in performance. They're very cheaply made, very high failure rate with very few hours on it. This saw had maybe 6 hours on it before they gave up on it. Couldn't get it to run consistently, and of course if you take it into a shop to get it fixed on, they're going to charge you $100 to $125, and when you pay $160 for a saw, it doesn't make sense. So the thing with this in stock form, it's unreliable, hard starting, just a miserable piece of crapola. A lot of that has to do with the EPA regulations in at the time. They have a really restrictive air intake system on them to make them quiet. It has a 2-barrel carburetor on it, which is a strange feature, which is almost impossible to find a carburetor kit for, and of course any 2-stroke engine is going to need carburetor repairs frequently. And so even here, it's for dummies. It shows a picture of how to put the chain on them properly so that the teeth are facing forward, in case you didn't know. And has a bunch of safety Sally stuff here. Don't do this, like don't cut concrete or steel. Concrete is really hard on your chain. Anyway, like I say, it's got lots of bads. Now this saw, I've actually got it to run quite well, and there again, when things are right on these and you do some modifications, it's actually pretty powerful. And I'd recommend to go back and watch our older videos. We've done quite a few on this, of the transition from a non-running saw to barely running to medium running, and now it's a real performer. It still has inconsistent starting. It's just the way they are. So anyway, the other thing is parts availability. Although they've made billions of these, lots of stuff you can't get, like carb kit. One other really bad feature is the fills here. The fuel filler cap here has a duckbill valve that lets the air in, and those fail frequently, and then you have to replace them all the time. But the other thing is that the opening is recessed on them, and so if you're not good about cleaning your saw after you're cutting with it, you open it up and a little bit of the sawdust goes in there and then plugs up your fuel filter, and it don't want to run. So anyway, the only good thing about little saws like this, and if you're mechanically savvy a bit, if you can get one of these running consistently and use it, your mechanical skills will be a whole lot better than they were before you started. So we'll move on to number 1 worst saw. This is without a doubt the worst saw I have ever owned. Unfortunately, I bought it new, thinking, well, it'd be light and handy and wasn't all that expensive, and I thought, it should be good for doing light entry work and just occasional cutting and stuff like that. I was only 100% wrong. It's no good for anything. Looks neat. Anyway, the problems with this saw are the same thing. It's extremely cheaply built. Even this handle is just a little cheesy plastic thing, and plastic atrophies over time and it'll just snap off. The recessed filler and oil caps, so sawdust gets in them. But You know, even the little lock button for the throttle here is just cheesy plastic, easy to snap off. It does have a few good features though. It's laid out very nicely, and it has a purge valve for the carburetor so you can prime it when it's been sitting for a while. And it generally starts pretty easy. But it has a chain brake again. It's fairly modern. This was made about 2000, I believe. But the interesting thing about it, when I bought it, you know, it fired right up, and so I decided to do a light break-in cut with it. And I was actually doing some in-tree work and stuff, and after about 10-15 minutes or so, I looked down, the chain was hanging really down and it was hot, and I thought, that's really weird. So I came out of the tree and checked it out, and I looked in the oil tank and it was completely empty. And I knew I'd filled it right before I went up in the tree. So it turns out that when the saw was built, they forgot to put a little elbow pipe in the oiling system. And so there was no home light dealers within 100 miles of us, so I got a hold of them direct and told them what they missed, and you know, they told me that I didn't know what I was talking about, and so I gave them the part number, and oh yeah, we use that on every saw. So I just told them, I said, well, just send me one, I'll fix it myself. But that wasn't good enough, so they contacted a former dealership, was about 25 miles away. They said, well, we'll send it out to you, which they did. And they charged me $22 for a little plastic elbow instead of free like it should have been. But anyway, I put it all together and used it for a little bit. And it's underpowered. It doesn't have any dogs on it for holding against the wood. And my dad did a little firewood cutting, so I gave it to him. And he said that every time that he used it, and when it would get warm, the chain would come off. And so he just quit using it, went and bought another saw and gave it back to me. And so I found that the cases warp when they get hot, and the original bar on it was really crummy. So I ended up having to put a new bar on it and chain. Extremely disappointing. Interesting, this is the only saw that I bought new that I still have, and all the Huskies and Stills and other stuff I bought new, they just wore out, and parts prices were stupid and stuff, so I always keep going back to my old McCulloughs because they run forever and hardly ever need any work. But I'll just talk briefly about this saw again. The few things that it's really good at: nice ergonomics, simple layout, starts easily when it's cold, doesn't want to start when it's hot, and you know, it's just a nice layout and looks good, even though it's no good. But the other thing I was interested in is it's 42cc, and looking on the builder's plate, it says made in Mexico, and it was made by John Deere because they owned Homelight for a short while, and so they should be ashamed. Thing is, parts availability for this too is virtually non-existent, although they still make the same basic saw today. So anyway, that's why don't buy stuff like this. Well, you know what's next. That's the best feature of that saw. It's lightweight and it's easy to throw. So remember, don't get stuff like this, even though it's vintage, unless you want a big challenge. So we'll see you on the next exciting vintage video. Well, thanks for watching. Our next video will be September 3rd for more vintage fun. See you then.